Hello, I've come on a bit early to make sure the system would work.
Oh, I didn't press start then.
Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to East Herts Council's Holocaust Memorial Day event. And this commemorates the Holocaust, and it takes place at this time of the year. This year is the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which has been featured actually in a lot of the newspapers. And those of you that were with us last year will remember Leslie Kleinman, who was our guest and whose family suffered in the Holocaust. Virtually his entire family were wiped out. He's actually written an article, I notice, in today's newspaper. And, you know, the Holocaust also commemorates the death at that time in the 1930s and 40s of Jews, Poles, Roma, gay people, disabled people, Soviet prisoners of war. I'm Jonathan Kay, I'm chairman of East Herts Council, and I'd like to welcome you this evening. I'd like to welcome here, we've got the Lord Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, Robert Voss, welcome Robert, the High Sheriff of Hertfordshire, Henry Holland Hibbert, Kate Bellini's, who's a Deputy Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, Susie Gordon, who's Vice Chairman of Hertfordshire County Council. There's Greg Ratty, who's Deputy Mayor of Sawbridge Town Council. Bishop Stortford Town Council's Mayor Keith Warnell, past Chairman of East Herts Council. Also Aga Dichten, who's the Chair of Watford Borough Council. Terry Doris, who's Mayor of Dacorum, welcome Terry. Bob Deering, the Mayor of Hertford. David Taylor, who is the Mayor of Broxbourne. We've got Keith Martin, who's the Chairman of Three Rivers District Council, and the Vice Chairman of Three Rivers, Martin Trevett. Also here are a number of East Herts councillors, as well as town councillors. And there are members of the Living Together in East Herts group, and also members of Harlow and Welwyn Garden City synagogues. Some people are viewing on Zoom, some on the East Herts District YouTube channel. You're very welcome. We're going to start this evening with a video which gives us an idea of what different areas of the country are doing in connection with the impact of Holocaust Memorial Day. So we'll share the screen and you'll be able to see the video. Peter.
Bear with me.
Yep, okay. Whilst he's doing that, I also say welcome to Annalise, who's the Mayor of Sawbridge. I've just noticed that you're there as well. You put the pictures up.
We are in the borough of Wigan and Leigh, and we have been performing for the 19th year our Holocaust Memorial Day. It has been very important for us as a group of people, and young people in the borough in particular. They've been learning about the Holocaust for many years.
We've got the sound but not the picture.
We are in the borough of Wigan and Leigh, and we have been performing for the 19th year our Holocaust Memorial Day. It has been very important for us as a group of people, and young people in the borough in particular. They've been learning about the Holocaust for many years, and they take part every year in drama, dance, music, and that's allowed them to actually understand about the discrimination a lot better. I felt that if we went into a public shopping centre with a space like this, that we would take the message of the Holocaust out to new people that have not really found out about it before.
I think it's important everyone, like different people, old and young, work together, because we can all learn from each other and different experiences, and the youths can learn from the elderly.
So to be part of a bigger picture, and not just in Britain but across the world, I think that is special.
Peter, do you need a few minutes to sort that out?
So what was the problem?
There's no picture.
Oh, right, hang on.
Except for your own computer, your
Okay,
paper database.
I thought it was sharing. Okay, 1 second.
We are in the borough of Wigan and Leigh, and we have been performing for the 19th year our Holocaust Memorial Day. It has been very important for us as a group of people, and young people in the borough in particular. They've been learning about the Holocaust for many years, and they take part every year in drama, dance, music, and that's allowed them to actually understand about the discrimination a lot better. I felt that if we went into a public shopping centre with a space like this, that we would take the message of the Holocaust out to new people that have not really found out about it before.
I think it's important everyone, different people, old and young, work together, because we can all learn from each other and different experiences, and the youths can learn from the elderly.
So to be part of a bigger picture, and not just in Britain but across the world, I think that is special.
We're here in Cardiff today to commemorate the Holocaust Memorial Day. You're here with the Welsh Muslim Cultural Foundation. For the past 3 years we've been making a point of commemorating this very special day. We then had a reading of the Holocaust Memorial Day prayer in English and Welsh by 2 of our young people from the Muslim community. We need to be doing something actively about it. No more being bystanders, is actually collectively standing up together, challenging hate, challenging prejudice, and actually more importantly standing up for people who don't have the power to do so.
Events like this can really help the community to come together as one and think about how we've progressed maybe and to stop these sort of stuff from repeating itself.
This is St Mungo's Museum of Religious Life and Art, which is a multi-faith museum where we work with secondary school pupils to develop a workshop. The secondary school pupils would present to primary school pupils who are invited from their catchment area. In the afternoon there would be invited dignitaries and guests.
3 schools came together and planned this event since September. We've been working on teaching the kids workshops, which is actually going on now, which is friendship bracelets and then a drama workshop.
It's been really heartfelt for all of us, because we knew about the Holocaust, but when we learn it in detail you realise the horror, and it really does, it impacts you to think how lucky you are to be alive in this generation, whether if you were in Poland at that time you could have been killed just for being different.
We're in the Reading Civic offices and we have been at a wonderful evening of prayer, reflection, symbolism, music, where we've brought together representatives of the faith communities, a multi-age, intergenerational group of people from different parts of Reading and different parts of the community to reflect together on what the Holocaust and the genocides have meant for us as human beings.
If the United Nations had said in 1948, 45, never again, and these things are still going on, then there is a reason for us to come together and try to promote a better understanding of our different communities, avoid making the same mistakes.
We stand together. We do it for the people here now. They need to remember so they can spot it happening in the future.
It was late 2015. I was invited to attend a Holocaust Day Memorial Trust event in Belfast. What they were looking to do was to run events inside each one of our prisons. And I began to think, well, how much better would it be if the prison population was actively involved, so the people that we care and the people that we look after understood the message by being part of it.
Everything had to be accurate, everything had to be 100% right, 100% correct. And then we came up with the idea, in this room you see around me, is for us to handwrite the names of the people who died.
We thought it was important to get the message out to young people about the events of the Holocaust, the importance of remembering, to try to make young people to think differently, to make better decisions, to make stronger decisions about their own lives and to make them better citizens.
It was very, very worthwhile and it changed my life for good, so I'm so glad I took part in it, so I'm delighted.
Right, well, we got there in the hint. So remembering that when we commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day, we also think of the genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, but as we'll hear later, sadly, other persecutions around the world that are taking place at the moment. Our first speaker this evening is the leader of East Herts Council, that's Linda Hazy. Linda, good evening.
Thank you and good evening and welcome to East Herts District Council YouTube and Zoom event. And the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is Be the Light in the Darkness. Be the Light in the Darkness is an affirmation and a call to action for everyone marking Holocaust Memorial Day. This theme asks us to consider different types of darkness. For example, identity-based persecution, misinformation, denial of justice, and different ways of being the light, such as resistance, acts of solidarity and rescue, and illuminating mistruths. We can also see this as an analogy of what we have been going through over the past year. And there are now glimmers of light that we will be able to see our way through lockdown, through this COVID crisis over the next few months. But it gives us the example, though, of the experience of what we have been able in our past lives and what we want to achieve going forward. But whilst we have been experiencing lockdowns, though, others in Darfur, parts of China, Hong Kong, and many other countries have had to cope with state repression. Muslims, Christians, and others from minority religion or culture. Despite what is going on in these countries and what else took place earlier in the middle of the 20th century, there are still people who want to divide us. In the storming of the Capitol building in Washington on January the 6th, a 56-year-old man vandalized part of the House Speaker's Nancy Pelosi's office. He was wearing a t-shirt marked Camp Auschwitz, work brings freedom, a translation from the German phrase that greeted Jews arriving at the Nazi concentration camps. Yet despite all this, there are now and were in the past good people doing brave things. In the early part of the last century, there were pogroms, persecution of Jews in Russia and Poland, and then far worse, in 1939, the Nazi occupation of Poland and much of Europe. But there were good people too. There are nearly 28,000 people listed at the Holocaust Remembrance Museum in Israel as righteous among the nations, non-Jews who helped Jews at a dangerous time. The largest number, 7,000, were Poles, including the man who eventually became Pope John Paul II. Then there was the Polish ambassador to Switzerland who faked Latin American passports in order to save Jews from being sent to concentration camps. He forged documents for 10,000 people. And then the Polish ambassador to Japan obtained visas for 2,000 Jewish refugees for Poland and Lithuania. The film actor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former Republican governor of California, came from Austria originally. He was aware of Kristallnacht when in 1938, Jewish-owned property and synagogues were smashed by what he describes as the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys, the far-right group involved with breaking into the Capitol building. In response to the former President Trump's comments and the storming of the building, he reminded people that his father and their neighbors experienced lies from the authorities back in the 1930s. And he said what he knows where lies can lead. He talked about the spinelessness when those who do not reject those lies. He equated Kristallnacht in Germany with what he called America's Kristallnacht. That night in Germany, 100 Jews died and 30,000 were sent to concentration camps. This time in America, a liberal, free, democratic society, 5 people ended up dead, including a policeman. Let us always feel free to speak up against injustices and untruths and not wait until it is too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. And now can we hear from the Leader of the Opposition, Councillor Naomi Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. I believe the theme of today's commemoration is Be the Light in the Darkness. Some of the darkest days in the history of our world occurred in the years of the Second World War. These were the years of the Holocaust, when the Jews were systematically persecuted by the Nazis. They were imprisoned in ghettos and ghastly concentration camps, and then murdered by shooting or by gas chamber. And by 1945, 6 million Jews had been murdered. This was genocide on an enormous scale. At the end of the war, as countries emerged from the darkness and into the daylight, the nations came together and vowed that such atrocities should never be allowed to happen again. Sadly, this vow has not been kept, as there have sadly been further acts of genocide, albeit smaller than the Holocaust, but there have been atrocities in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and Myanmar. And now we see the persecutions of the Uyghur Muslims in China. We are still, it seems, in darkness. We desperately need more light. We need candles and candlelight to help us remember the victims of all these horrors. Sorry, I've lost my picture. We need candlelight. We need to remember the victims, and we need to remember and honor the courageous heroes who actually stood up against the crimes. We also need very strong searchlights, which can shine into all the corners of the world and to search out evil and injustice and persecution. We need glorious sunlight to give us the power and energy to combat all these forms of evil and persecution and injustice. And finally, I think we need fiery, fizzy lights within each one of us so that we will campaign tirelessly for peace, for justice, for respect, and for kindness for all our brothers and sisters throughout the world. Let us indeed be the light. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayoni. And now we'll move on to Rabbi Irit Shilor, who's the rabbi at Harlow Synagogue. And Harlow has a lot of its members who live in East Harts and Broxbourne, I would say. In fact, I think your latest logo is serving Essex and Hertfordshire, which is a big area to cover. But Irit, good evening to you. Please go ahead. Oh, is she there?
Yeah, she's there. I think she needs to unmute though.
Oh yes, please unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This year, so thank you very much, John, and thank you for having me this evening. This year, as we commemorate the Holocaust and other genocides, we are called to be a light in the darkness. Norman Solomon says, and I quote from our Reform Prayer book, "Why then does the world make so little progress? One reason is that ancient hatreds and rivalries are allowed to deflect people from the problems of the present. Political and religious ideologies perpetuate hatred, and at the same time as they preach peace and love. Religions harbor vast destructive forces. Yet at the same time, they have a vast potentiality for good. How do we harness the good which is in religions at the same time as ensuring that the bad which is in them does not take over? This is precisely the role of dialogue, and it demands openness and often painful self-criticism. When we talk together, the presence of the other makes us turn back to the sources of our faiths and rediscover the seminal constructive elements within them, elements the faithful may have marginalized. In looking together at the world, we encounter a common responsibility and hence a common mission. In the light of nuclear threat and environmental hazard, our common mission turns out to be far more urgent than the narrow individual missions directed against one another, aimed at propagating some particular formulation of religious faith. There are, within all our political and religious groupings, those who put doctrine before the needs of people, who talk of love and concern, but who see others only as potential converts to their own way of thinking. These are the sort of people who centuries ago turned the Middle Ages into a byword for obscurantism and intolerance. Even now, they are ready to head us back along the same path to an age made still darker by the abuse of the powerful gifts of modern science and technology. People from all faiths together must resist this and offer a more enlightened leadership. The intelligent articulation in the contemporary context of the richness of our own traditions is the building block we bring to the reconstruction of the world." And Marge Piercy adds, "Let holiness move in us. Let us pay attention to its small voice. Let us see the light in others and honor that light. Remember the dead who paid our way here dearly, dearly. And remember the unborn for whom we build our houses. Praise the light that shines before us, through us, after us."
Thank you very much indeed, Rabbi Shilor. In a few moments, Becky, we'll hear from you. First, we're going to have a musical interlude. Hopefully, technically, this will work. This is not a video, this is audio. and it was selected by Rabbi Shilor. And we're going to hear Mi Sheberach, which is in Hebrew. It's a song for healing, and it's from the cantors from Reform Judaism in the UK.
Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, hu yivarech v'yirapeh et hacholim. Elna, Refana, Elna, Refana, la. Elna, Refana, Elna, Refana, la. Mishaberach, Avotenu, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, hu yivarech v'yirapeh et hacholim. Elna, Refana, Elna, Refana, la. Elna, Refana, Elna, Refana, la. Mishaberach, Avotenu, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, hu yivarech v'yirapeh et hacholim.
Misha Beirach, a song for healing. Well, now we're going to hear from Becky Achilles. Becky is involved with Ware Community Muslims, and I've known Becky for a few years now. She's also involved with the Living Together in East Hearts group that we put together. She's the joint secretary, and she's going to be reading an article that was about, well, really the words of Omir Bakali. Omir is a Uyghur Muslim, and he's recounting his imprisonment, torture, and indoctrination at the hands of the Chinese state. And this is in an interview by Victor Jack, and it comes from Varsity magazine, the magazine of the University of Cambridge. Becky, if you can unmute yourself, yeah.
Good evening, everybody. After that lovely piece of music, I'll continue. I've looked up the Chinese words that I'm going to read from this article to make sure I pronounce them properly, so fingers crossed, I'm going to try my best. This is Omir Bakali's account. In early 2017, life looked bright for 41-year-old Omir Bakali. A proud father of three, he had a tourism degree, a small business, and several managerial positions under his belt. He was set to lead the Kazakh delegation to the upcoming international Astana Trade Exposition, an event which typically draws in millions. But in March, a seemingly innocuous trip to promote the event in Xinjiang, northwest China, would ensure he would never attend. During a short post-work visit to his family in nearby Turpan, On the morning of the 26th of March, policemen showed up at the door to arrest him, beginning a near 8-month journey of an ending physical and psychological torment. They shackled my hands and put fabric over my eyes, black fabric over my eyes, Omer says. I feel my body tremble whenever I remember that moment. Omer was born to Uyghur and Kazakh parents in Xinjiang, a semi-autonomous region in northwest China. For centuries, it had been home to Uyghur Muslims who make up just under half the population and hold a distinctive culture, religion and language to the country's majority ethnic Han Chinese. Economic, cultural and religious discrimination against the Uyghurs had been brewing for decades, but in 2014, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a new People's War on Terror, aimed at fighting regional terrorists and separatists, calling for a new era of mass surveillance, police presence and skyrocketing arbitrary imprisonments of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Following his arrest, Omer was thrown into a small police station cell where he was kept for a week, still with no explanation. He says the room seemed to be built for 12 people, but contained more than 36 others who, like him, had their arms and legs constantly shackled. Soon he was transferred to another police station, where he says the authorities subjected him to 4 complete days of torture. Omer says he was put into a tiger chair for long periods, a metal seat-like contraption which just restricts movements. Police also hung him from the roof of the cell by his wrists so his feet could not touch the floor, and later smashed his knuckles with hammer-like instruments. Those scars are still there. Whenever I remember those experiences, my body shakes, he says. Omer thinks his job, which lent itself to significant regional travel, had both aroused the suspicion of the authorities and provided them with the perfect excuse to accuse him of terrorist activities. I did not confess anything because I hadn't done anything, he says. Maybe they thought after torture I would just confess something I had never done before. Soon Omer was moved to a nearby highly fortified prison camp, spending 7 months locked up, still with no access to lawyers, phones to contact his family with, nor any real explanation for his arrest. In November 2017, he was transported to his final destination, arriving at one of what China has termed re-education camps. 4-meter walls and electrical fences surround the complex, Omer recounts, and armed guards patrol the camp at all times of the day and night. Inside, there are 40 people to 16 square meter rooms. Prisoners as young as 15 and as old as 80 are placed into these cramped cells, he says. Occasionally, they're moved to larger rooms, but no one is allowed outside. 24 hours a day, prisoners are shackled. Iron chains are tied around their necks, fixed to loose iron blocks that Omer says weigh around 8 to 10 kilograms, forcing prisoners to always be hunched down. He believes this is just one of the ways in which the camps are designed to instill a submissive position in prisoners through their captors. I stayed in that room with lots of different people, some of them with business people, historians, school professors, writers, singers, recounts Omer. They speak much better Chinese than Chinese people themselves, and they have much more money than the Chinese themselves. They don't need to be re-educated. On a typical day at the camp, he says, inmates are woken up at 5 a.m. and given a meagre serving of bread and soup. They're then forced to repeatedly sing songs which praise the Chinese Communist Party, stress China's greatness, and show gratitude towards President Xi Jinping personally. We sing from when we wake up in the morning till lunch, and then after lunch we do nothing else, just eat and praise the Chinese Communist Party. Prisoners are constantly warned about 48 characteristics considered hostile to the Chinese state, which include growing beards, praying, and religious charity giving, according to Omer. The aim of these drills is clear, he says. Become Han Chinese, forget your religion, and forget your culture. After 20 days, Omer was finally released. His wife had sent endless letters to the UN and Foreign Ministry of Kazakhstan, where he previously was naturalized. He had also sat for an interview with Free Asia Radio, all of which pressured 2 Kazakh ambassadors to finally visit him, and soon after the Chinese authorities freed him. The Chinese government calls them re-education camps. Actually, there are no re-education camps. They are all concentration camps. This is a strikingly different picture to the one China has painted, claiming that the camps provide vocational training, prisoners can leave at any time, and operations are scaling down. But a report released last month found that China had built almost 400 new camps since 2017, while the new testimonies have emerged alleging slave labour, forced sterilisations and organ harvesting taking place inside the camps too. In 2019, the European Parliament and US Congress passed laws and resolutions condemning these imprisonments, while in the UK, a cross-party parliamentary group is said to be planning new legislation aimed at addressing the humanitarian crisis. But when 23 countries issued statements to the UN last year denouncing China's actions, they were met with counter-statements from over 50 mainly Muslim majority nations who defended China's human rights policies. Omar says he's heartened to hear that UK new proposed legislation and is grateful to Britain for considering it, but he laments the international response. I want to make it clear that the Uyghur genocide is not just about religion. It's a test for humanity for the whole world. When asked what Cambridge students can do to help, Omar offered straightforward advice. Talk to other people or friends and raise awareness so more people realise the severity of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for practicing some of those difficult names, which is understandable. We're going to see a video now, and this was to do with Bosnia, and it was 1995, and I suppose it was the first genocide in Europe after the Second World War. Peter.
Yep, bear with me. Yep.
You know, we were attacked because we were Muslims, because it was a Serb plan to claim this part of the country for themselves. So in that sense, what happened here was not personal. People who targeted me from the above. On the other hand, it was so personal when it came to the people who attacked us, because I recognized many soldiers. And then of course neighbors came from behind the hedge.
Well, let's move on now, and let's go back to the time of the Second World War and welcome our guest speaker this evening, John Carr. John, he was a former councillor on the old GLC, the Greater London Council. He was a Labour parliamentary candidate for Hertford and Stortford back in 1983. He got his OBE for work on internet security, and his book was recently reviewed by the former Home Secretary Charles Clarke. John, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Sorry, could you just, how long do you want me to sort of speak for?
Maybe about 15 minutes, something like that.
Okay, so that's my book. It's called Escape from the Ghetto, and it's it's about my dad, who was in the ghetto in Lodz, in Łódź. So Łódź was how the Poles say it, Lodz was how the Jews said it. And it's based, the core of the book is based on conversations that took place between me and my dad, many of which I tape recorded, some were videoed when his brother came over from Israel, and many were based on contemporaneous notes that I made at the time or very shortly afterwards. But I was also able, because I know how unreliable memories can be, I was also able to confirm major parts of my dad's story from independent sources, both in Poland and from Germany and from British Army and Polish Army records. And I'll get to that in a second. So he was born Chaim Hirschman, in a little place called Giraldów. The Hirschmans were all from Giraldów and Moszczonów, just outside Warsaw, and he married into the Blumowitz family from Lodz. So my dad actually, they all moved to Lodz, and they moved into a part of Lodz called Bałty, which, if any of you know anything about the Lodz ghetto, that became the central area that constituted what later became the Lodz ghetto. So whilst most Jews in Poland and around Europe had to pack up their houses and move into the ghetto, in my dad's case, the ghetto came to him. In fact, he was already there, and the Nazis built it around him. So it's very difficult to tell the story of what is in essence a journey of escape that took 3 years. It ended in Gibraltar, and then he came to the UK. So I won't try and go through each bit of the journey step by step, because it's a bit boring if you just say, then he did this, and then he did that, and then he went here, and then he went there. So I'll try and pick out just a few of the sorts of highlights, starting with the escape from the ghetto itself. So there were 3 little boys. My dad, who was 13 years old at the time, Chaim, and he was the oldest of the 3. There was his first cousin, Avram Hersh Lefkowitz, who was usually known by his Polish name, which was Heniek, and my dad's little brother, Strulek Hirschman. And this is early 1940, so the ghetto hadn't yet been sealed, but they were building the walls and building the barricades and the barbed wires at that point, and the ghetto rules already applied. So food was being rationed and you weren't allowed to go outside of the ghetto area. But these 3 little boys decided that they would try to get out of the ghetto, steal some food, bring it back in to help feed their family. So for them, this was just another day. My dad went through the wire first. He was the oldest. And by the way, and this is extremely important, he was blonde with blue eyes. He went through the wire first, and then his little brother came through second. Heniek stayed behind to act as the watch. Strulek got caught on the wire, and he let out a terrible scream, and this attracted the attention of a German guard. The German guard came to see what was going on, saw what was obviously a little Jewish boy on the wire, and started moving towards him, taking his rifle off his shoulder as he walked. So it was quite clear what he intended to do. My dad, already being outside the ghetto, realizing what was happening, managed to approach the soldier as he was approaching Strulek, his little brother. And he had a knife in his bag, and he took the knife out and stabbed the German guard in the stomach. The German guard didn't die then, but he fell to the floor. And then my dad slit his throat, basically, and he died very rapidly. My dad then went to the wire. Henyek came out from inside the ghetto to the wire, and the two of them got Strulek off the wire. So my dad at this point is still outside the ghetto, 13-year-old boy, covered in this German soldier's blood. And he says to Henyek and Strulek, "We got to go. If they find out what we've done, not only will they kill us, they'll kill all of our families, probably all of our neighbors, and anybody who happens to be walking by on the street at the time the Germans arrive to do it. So we've got to run." Strulek and Henyek said no. They were too scared, and they went back into what they thought of as being the safety of the ghetto, something that they were familiar with. Strulek died in Helmo. He was murdered in Helmo camp in July 1944, so he managed to live 4 further years in the ghetto. And Henyek survived. And in fact, Henyek only died 2 years ago in San Diego, where he was living with his daughter. He went straight from a displaced persons camp to the United States after the war. His brother went to Israel, but later joined him in the United States. So the Nazis arrived in Lodz on the 8th of September 1939. 2 days before they arrived, my dad's older brother, Natan, went east. Many Jews went east as the Nazis were coming in from the west. They believed if they could get to the Soviet Union, they would find sanctuary. So when my dad is outside the ghetto wall now, all on his own, he hadn't said goodbye to his mum or dad or brothers or sisters, nothing, because he thought he'd be back home that evening. That was something that lived with him for the rest of his life. So he decides to go east and try to reach the Soviet Union as well. He reaches the Bug River, and it was frozen out. That was the new border between the Soviet Union and Nazi-occupied Eastern Poland. And in a column of refugees, they tried to cross on the ice. The river was frozen. And the Soviet soldiers shot them all and threw hand grenades at them. My dad, being right at the very back of the queue, was not killed. So he hung around this is at Vlodava, by the way. The town where this happened was Vlodava na Bugim, which is a town south of Lublin on the Bug River. So he's nearly 14, or in fact, he has his 14th birthday while he's living in Vlodava. The Polish government in exile had set up in France, and they were saying that anybody who could fight, they should try to get to France to join the Free Polish Army to begin the fight back against the Nazis. So my 14-year-old dad, alone in the world, he decides that's what he will try to do to get over to France. And eventually he does it. And a big part of the book is about that journey to France. His life is saved twice by good Germans, by the way. So not every German in the book is a bad person. There were some strong anti-Nazi Germans, and my dad was fortunate enough to meet at least one of them. The other German who saved his life didn't know he was a Jew. Otherwise, maybe he would have behaved differently. But nevertheless, the fact was that everybody he met was not wicked and evil, even amongst the Germans. He got into Vichy France eventually, and there was a couple of Jewish refugees there, and he stayed in one in Voiron in the south of France, towards the south of France, until of course the Germans then invaded Vichy France, and he decided he would skedaddle. He makes his way to Perpignan and then over the Pyrenees, again with a column of refugees. This time they all made it, but coming down on the Spanish side, my dad fell and hurt his leg, and he was picked up and arrested by Spanish border guards, was taken to Miranda del Abro prison, where he basically decided that if they discovered he was a Polish Jew, and certainly if they discovered that he was from a part of Poland that was now actually technically part of Germany, they might ship him back. And if they shipped him back, he'd be dead. His family would be dead. He didn't know what the fate of his family was at this point. So he decided to pass himself off very ingenious, enterprising young man. He decided to tell the Spanish prison authorities he was a French Canadian. His French Canadian parents had been in France when the war started. They got separated. He was trying to get over to Lisbon to get a boat back to Canada. Canada didn't have its own representation in Spain at the time. The British Embassy represented Canadian interests. British diplomats were coming to this prison all the time because there were lots of prisoners from the Spanish Civil War, many of whom were British and Commonwealth citizens who they were dealing with. So my dad fessed up and told this British diplomat, look, I'm a Polish Jew. If you shot me, I'm dead. So I've told him I'm a French Canadian. If you go along with that story, you can get me out of here. And that diplomat, God bless him, went along with it and got my dad out of the prison. And eventually he ends up in Gibraltar. There is a book. The Polish authorities had a permanent mission in Gibraltar because it was one of the main exit points from Nazi-occupied Europe. And I've got a copy of the page, 22nd of January 1943, with my dad's signature, signifying his arrival in Gibraltar. They took him to England on a boat, took him to the UK on a boat, and the first thing they did, he landed in Greenock in Scotland, and the first thing they did was they brought him to London and locked him up as a potential spy in the Royal Patriotic School in Wandsworth. He was blonde, he was blue-eyed, he was fluent German speaker, like many Jews from Lodz were, because a third of the city were Germans anyway. Eventually, a rabbi came down to the prison, or what was effectively a prison on Wandsworth Common, and confirmed that this boy was a Jew. So the chances of him being a Nazi spy were very, very slender. My dad then, so he was released, he joined the Free Polish Army, signed up just outside Regent's Park in March 1943. He was in the Free Polish Army for about a year. Now, one of the bits of the book that I found most interesting, which I knew very little about, and which even when I spoke to my dad about, he didn't tell me that much about, the levels of anti-Semitism that existed within the Free Polish Army in the United Kingdom during the war. Tom Dryburgh, who despite his name, by the way, was a Christian, Sidney Silverman, who was not a Christian, a Labour MP. Tom Dryburgh was an independent MP at the time, but he became a Labour MP later. Bob Boothby, who was a Tory MP, Donald Soper and Eleanor Rathbone, and a young Michael Foote, who was at the time a journalist, led a quiet campaign to get all of the Jews in the Free Polish Army the right to leave en masse and join the British Army. So that's what, and my dad was in that group of Jews, and his last day in the Free Polish Army was the 14th of March 1944, and his first day in the British Army was the 15th of March 1944. And that's how it came to be that in 1945, wearing the uniform of the Royal Berkshire Regiment, which is the one that he ended up in, he was on the Rhine crossing where he was injured. He got a war pension for the rest of his British Army war pension for the rest of his life. After the war, obviously he went back to Lodz to see if he could find anybody. Couldn't find anybody at all. He didn't know at that point that his brother was still alive. He thought he was the only Hirschman left on the planet. So he goes back to his station with the British Army in Germany. Because he can speak fluent German, he helps with the interrogation of suspected Nazi war criminals in the trials that were held in Hamburg in northern Germany. Eventually comes back to the United Kingdom, ends up in a Scottish parachute regiment. I will now show you the reverse side of my book. There's my dad in a kilt. I wanted to call my book The Jew in the Kilt, right? Because various friends of mine thought that will sell the book better than a title like The Escape from the Ghetto. But the publisher thought that was too frivolous. And it's true that the bit of him about him being in the Scottish parachute regiment does come at the very end of his story during the war. Anyway, so he's demobbed in 1949. But here's an important thing that happened just before then. In 1947, there were anti-Semitic riots on the streets of the United Kingdom. In Bristol, in Liverpool, in Glasgow, and in London. This was linked to events in Palestine. Some of you who know your history will know that the Irgun hung 2 British soldiers, and there were these anti-Semitic riots, led, by the way, by ex-servicemen, but nevertheless they were significant steps. So there's my dad, all alone in the world, in a foreign country, anti-Semitic riots taking place. He decided that maybe disclosing the fact that he was a Jew wouldn't be too clever an idea right then, okay? So he's demobbed, he goes to Glasgow, nice Jewish boy, gets a job in the schmatter business. It's all in the book. And he goes to night school on Sauchiehall Street to learn how to be a better tailor. And he meets a beautiful young Irish woman called Elizabeth Angela Cassidy. And there was a Richard Cassidy present earlier on. I don't know if he's still there. I doubt that we're related, but anyway, she's my mother, right? He's blonde, he's blue-eyed, he's Polish. Are you a Catholic? Of course I'm a Catholic. He falls in love with this beautiful Irish girl, my mother. They even managed to get married in a Catholic church, which was not easy and involved a little bit of subterfuge. And he managed to maintain this lie, this subterfuge about his real origins for quite a long time. Now I'm going to tell you the next bit of the story, and you've got to promise not to laugh. And by the way, if you don't laugh, you will be the first people ever not to laugh. So how did it finally emerge that my dad was actually Chaim Hirschman? Well, he never stopped looking for his family after the war. And finally, he found that his brother, Natan Hirschman, was alive and living in Israel, in Haifa. He was determined to meet up with his brother, and he was determined to bring him to England, because there was no possibility of him getting out to Israel. So he writes to Natan in Israel and says, Natan, they think my name is Henryk Karbowski. That's a Polish Catholic name that he used when he was on the run. And it was also the name of his best friend in Poland before the war. So when you get here, you've got to be Michael Karbowski, a Catholic who married a Catholic who married a Jewish woman that you met in a displaced persons camp after the war, and that's why you ended up in Israel. So Natan writes back and says, well, it sounds unlikely, but if you think that'll work, and he went along with it. So Uncle Michael came to Leeds, which is, my old Etonian accent can sometimes be confusing. I am actually a Yorkshireman. My Uncle Michael, as we then called him, came to Leeds. He stayed for 2 weeks. He didn't speak a word of English, but the other Polish people in the neighborhood, we lived in Headingley, just by the cricket ground, and the other Polish people in the neighborhood quickly worked out what the score was. And when Natan went back to Israel, they all came to visit my mum and said, Angela, you know what? That guy's a Jew. And if he's a Jew and he's the brother of your husband, the likelihood is your husband is a Jew. Now, the truth is, because my dad was living this terrible lie for so long, the marriage had gone on the rocks anyway. And I wouldn't say that this was the last straw that broke the camel's back, but it definitely added some color to what subsequently became their divorce. And they split, and my dad went off to live in London. Anyway, for many years later, I go to the London School of Economics and Political Science as an undergraduate. My dad, by this time, is living in Soho in a gigantic flat. He offers me a bedroom, free, gratis and for nothing, and meals. He's reaching out to me, I'm reaching out to him. So I go and live with my dad. And that's when I begin interrogating him. He didn't want to talk about it at all to begin with, but eventually he opened up. I went to Israel, I met his relatives, I met one of the guys, Nachman Blumovitz, who'd gone to Palestine in 1933 as a Zionist pioneer to build a socialist paradise. I met all of that lot. I went to Poland 5 or 6 times, and eventually my dad was convinced I was serious, and that's how the book came about. It feels like I've been writing it all my adult life, and I recognize it's probably cheaper than a psychoanalyst because it helped me work out a lot of things to do with me and my dad. I've probably gone on for too long, but I hope you will like the book.
John, thank you very much indeed. What a fascinating story. And I did wonder how Chaim Hertzman became Henry Carr, but of course it was very common in those post-war years for people to change their names. And how your father at the age of 13 coped and got through that, I can never understand. Well, I'm now going to, the book, by the way, is Escape from the Ghetto, and it's a fascinating read, it really is. I'm going to ask the Lord Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, Robert Voss, now to, if you like, do the equivalent, the sort of virtual equivalent of proposing a vote of thanks. Robert himself, I know his family or parents or grandparents came as refugees to this country from Germany. Robert.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I will tell you a little bit about my story as you've asked me to, because in fact, you're not quite right. Most of my family actually perished in concentration camp, including my grandparents, but I'll come on to that in a second. John, what an amazing story, absolutely fascinating. My wife, who's sitting on the other side of the room, has actually, I think, gone to Amazon to try and get your book immediately. So at least you sold one, but a fantastic story. And I know it's probably one of many that are around, but many of them, most of them are not told. Yours has been told, and therefore is something that really one needs to read, which leads me on to a comment made yesterday. Those of us who were fortunate enough to have listened in to the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust event, which is normally held in Westminster, but was obviously online, will have heard comments from the Prince of Wales, where he said, it is the duty of us to remember the survivors' stories. The survivors are all dying away, sadly, and it befalls on those of us who are what we call second-generation survivors to make sure that their story continues to be told. Very briefly, and if I may, Jonathan, if I have a couple of minutes, some of you will have heard my story, but my parents were both from Nazi Germany. My mother escaped early. My father, who was attacked in Kristallnacht and was beaten up by Nazi youths, was from a family in Mönchengladbach, a town just outside Düsseldorf. The family had been there, integral part of the community since 1650. My father managed to escape to the UK in May 1939 and then spent 3.5 years fighting in the British Army until he was invalided out, interestingly enough, to Hatfield House. His brother, his two sisters had come to London as well. His elder brother didn't manage to escape and ended up in a concentration camp in Belgium, from which he survived. His parents, however, and this only came to light in 2017 when I was fortunate enough that the BBC took me to Germany to do a film about my family's history. It came to light that my grandparents, who we knew had perished, but didn't know where, had perished in a camp called Sobibor. And in fact, this is a copy of a telegram signed by Adolf Eichmann, committing them on the train that they were obliged to take in June 1942, which was destined to a ghetto. John will be interested, the ghetto of Izbica, which is in eastern Poland. And many members of my father's family, 60 members actually, were destined to go to Izbica. But this train, on the instruction of Adolf Eichmann, on this telegram, diverted into the new death camp called Sobibor, and that's sadly where my grandparents, my father's parents, perished. As I say, the other 60 members of the family who ended up in the ghetto of Izbica were not as fortunate, or should I say, as forthright as perhaps John's father was, and all 60 perished eventually in the camps either in Sobibor or in Belzec. So it's a very sad story. My father, as I say, came to Britain, met my mother, married here, and Britain was their home, and I'm forever grateful to this country for what I say gave me life, because if it hadn't taken in both my parents as refugees, I wouldn't exist. So for me to be honoured by Her Majesty the Queen and serve as the first and only Jewish Lord Lieutenant of England is a huge honour. But it's an honour really that I hold for my family and for the 6 million who perished. Sadly, my father died at the age of 50. His brother died at the age of 50. His sister died at the age of 50. I'm certain from broken hearts at having to leave their parents behind and not knowing what happened to their parents definitively. So when one talks about the Holocaust killing 6 million people, it's actually a lot more. And it affects many, many more people, myself included, and many, many, many second generation, what we call second generation survivors. We obviously didn't go through the traumas that they went through. But it does mean that we have a duty to tell the stories. And therefore, John, the story that you have told of your father, a fascinating story, is of great significance. I try and tell my father's and my grandparents' story to those who are interested. I think we have a duty, as His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales said yesterday, to make sure these stories are told over and over again. And it was enlightening to see the film, Jonathan, at the beginning, where so many young people are learning, even today, in fact, perhaps more so today, the truth about the Holocaust. And if I can just finalize by saying, using again the words of His Royal Highness yesterday, he said, "We can be the light that ensures darkness never returns." Sadly, we've heard that the darkness is returning, is still around, but I think we have a duty to humanity and to society and to the communities to ensure that we are the light by telling stories, by engaging with people, to make sure, as His Royal Highness said, that the darkness never returns. So thank you for arranging this evening. It's been most enlightening. John, thank you again for your very interesting story, which I realize was only part of it. And I look forward, when I can steal the book away from my wife, to reading the rest of it. But many, many thanks. And thank you, Chairman, for holding this evening's event.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. And again, our thanks to John Carr for coming along this evening. We're now going to hear from our second rabbi of the evening, Rabbi Yaakov Tutz, who's the rabbi at Welwyn Garden City Synagogue, and also there are members who live in East Harts that go to that synagogue too. Yaakov, please go unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello, Chairman John, nice to see you again. Thank you very much for inviting me this evening. Can you hear me? Am I good?
Mm-hmm.
I'm completely humbled, honored and privileged to be here this evening. I'm very conscious that I'm a lot younger than everybody here, and I feel very inadequate and not really worthy to be saying anything. A little bit like I've been asked to teach David Beckham how to play football. Not really, you know, you've asked me, so I'll do my best, but very, very moved by all the presentations, especially your story, John. I think I'll say, Lord Lieutenant, and there will be two more copies sold now. Definitely something that I would be interested in reading. Just a little bit of a personal background. My family, I was born in South Africa. Almost all South African Jews come from Lithuania, and my grandparents, their families moved to South Africa in the early 30s, late 20s and 30s. I think that's when it was. And their family stayed in Lithuania, and they were all murdered in the Holocaust. And you know, we it's very, very close to our family. I myself went back to Poland for the first time about a year ago, and I haven't fully recovered. And part of me wants to say no one should go, and part of me wants to say everybody should go. And it's one of those. Just very, very. I'd like to say something very, very short, very quick, and I think, you know, something constructive and something about going forward, about the future. To me, the main question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we go forward? How do we look ahead? How do we be better people and be a light in a very dark and cruel world that we live in? So I'm going to do a little trick that one of my kids actually showed me, believe it or not, but I'm going to play with my background and do this. So this is the previous Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, and he says something very, very profound. He said, we all have many questions, and some questions we can answer, some questions we can't answer. Questions like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to us? That's a question we can't answer. We need to train ourselves to ask questions that we can answer, like, what is it I can do? What is it I can do to help? So we're going to travel somewhere slightly different now. I think this will be the last of our journeying to Egypt. and there's a pyramid in Egypt. And we're reading, in synagogues. Well, not now, because fortunately we can't go to synagogue. But we're reading the story about the Exodus from Egypt, and we come across a fellow called Moses, one of our greatest biblical leaders. And Moses was the leader, and we know two things about his beginnings. And I love this so much, and I think it's so helpful and so relevant to all of this. Moses, about his beginning, we know he was a shepherd, and we know he had one sheep that ran away, and he chased the sheep and he brought it back. He didn't give up on even a small sheep. And the other thing that we know about Moses is that he came out of his house, he saw an Egyptian beating a Jew, and he killed the Egyptian, and he saved his brother, the Jew. And we are taught by our sages that Moses had questions, and Moses asked God questions that he didn't get answers to. Moses, and it's clear from many sources, that Moses said to God, why do you cause so much suffering? And God said, I can't give you the answer. But what we learned from Moses, that he didn't let that question paralyze him. He had that question till the day he died, but he didn't let that question paralyze him. He asked questions that he could answer. He said, well, what is it I can do to help? How can I be a better person? How can I help the people around me? Now, I'll just end by saying that, after this evening, I don't know about all of you, but I've got this horrible taste in my mouth, and it's like a very horrible, heavy, intense feeling. And I think because all human beings are deeply, fundamentally, spiritually connected, we are tasting just a tiny fraction of what some people in the world are feeling. And I think that, on some level, makes all of us that much more compassionate. That's why I think evenings like this are so valuable, even if we are all trapped in our houses, or me in Egypt. But I think it's so valuable and so constructive. So thank you so much, Chairman John, for having a fantastic evening like this. And thank you again for inviting me. Let's us together ask questions that we can answer and be a light in our world of darkness. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rabbi Yaakov Tutz. And we're going to hear a piece of music now. It's a choir, and it's the Spanish and Portuguese choir singing Esai Enai. And they're singing this in Bevis Marks Synagogue, which I think is the oldest synagogue in Britain. It opened in 1701. And it's the Spanish and Portuguese choir, because there's a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, because Jews who came from Southern Europe are Sephardi, whereas those of us from Northern Europe are Ashkenazi. So this is Bevis Marks Synagogue. Peter, you can start clicking the buttons now if you like. I'll just read to you something about what it says. It talks about the Lord is your guardian, the Lord is your shadow, he is by your right hand. By day, the sun will not smite you, nor will the moon at night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from now and to eternity. We'll listen to the choir in Esai Enai.
Can you see that? It's okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
SINI from the Spanish and Portuguese choir of Bevismark Synagogue, which is in the City of London. And that was recommended, incidentally, by Stephen Lopez Diaz, who's the chairman of Welling Garden City Synagogue. And apparently his uncle and 2 cousins are in that choir. Perhaps that's why he recommended it, I don't know. But thanks very much indeed, Stephen. And thank you very much indeed for all of your contributions to this evening. Thank you for joining us at East Herts Council. Who knows what happens come next January, we shall see. My thanks also to Peter Mannings from Democratic Services of East Herts Council. It's the first time that he's done the technical bits. So, you know, after a difficult start, we got there. So Peter, thank you very much indeed for your assistance too. John Carr made reference to Richard Cassidy earlier on. Richard Cassidy is the Chief Executive of East Herts Council. I doubt, John, that Richard is a relative of yours, but who knows? You never know. I'm just going to, well, we're going to end with a song by an Israeli singer, Ash Sular, called Never Again, which was written for Holocaust remembrance. And then that will be it. That will be the end of our evening. I'm just going to leave you with the words of Elie Wiesel, the former survivor of concentration camp, who said, "We must never be bystanders to injustice or indifferent to suffering." Thank you for joining us. All right, yes, indeed. Thank you. And we'll hear Never Again, and then that'll be the end of our evening. And then the YouTube presentation and the Zoom will disappear after that. Peter.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming along.
Why must our people be blamed? Whoa, whoa. To be the ones that they shame. Whoa, whoa. What's their fault that you condemn? What's their crime? What's their sin? Just to be born of this heritage. They say we can learn from history, but oh, we forget so easily. They say we can learn from history. Whoa, whoa. And we say never again, no, never again, never again. But it's never the end, and we must still stand with them. We say never again, no, never again, never again. But it's never the end, and we must still stand with them. Now is the time to stand up. Oh, oh. Now is the time we must speak up. Oh, oh. We are chosen to be the voice for the ones who have no choice. We are chosen to be their voice. And we say never again, no, that goes round and story.